I'm Elise Raposa, steering committee member and your moderator for this evening. Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the last round and their staff for their support of this event. As our way of repaying them, please avail yourself of all the food and drink they have to offer, but just be patient with since they run on unlimited staff. Today's topic is Cringeworthy, the Overlooked Promise of Awkwardness. New research indicates that this state can unexpectedly help, not hinder, human well-being. Our speaker this evening is Maggie Jackson, an award-winning science writer and the author of Uncertain, The Wisdom and Wonder of Being Unsure, a National Book Award nominated book that was named Nonfiction Book of the Year in 2024 by the independent publishers of New England. Her earlier book, Distracted, sparked a global conversation about the costs of fragmenting our attention. A former Boston Globe columnist, she now divides her time between Little Compton and New York City. Quick, for anyone new tonight, we do have a email sign up to be on our mailing list, and then we post our events to Facebook and the New Bedford Lights event calendar. Per our usual format, she will give us a brief overview of today's topic, which will be followed by plenty of time for questions. During the Q&A, I'll make my way around the room to make sure that people in the back are able to get their questions answered. So, please join me in welcoming Maggie Jackson.
Thank you so much for coming out. It's very nice. It was the week after the storm, so just a little bit of rain obviously didn't deter people from finding out about awkwardness. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Anne and Elise and all their efforts to put on what is a great event. I was here 2 years ago when my new book, Uncertain, came out, which is on sale here on the side along with my book, Distracted. My husband is going to be selling, so come on up afterwards and I'll be happy to sign and chat and answer questions. So, just to start, I wanted to tell a little story, share a little personal story. I had a friend named Jim, and if you can't hear, by the way, just raise your hand and I'll repeat or slow down or something. But I have a friend named Jim, and he was dating a girl from Greece. And he and she decided to get married, and so they went to Athens to ask the parents for the daughter's hand in marriage, to announce their engagement. And Jim learned a little Greek so he could do it the traditional way and sit down with the dad and ask for the hand. And by the way, in Greek, the word to marry is pantrevo. The word to fornicate is pornevo. Jim sat down and graphically asked to sleep with the guy's daughter. Awkward. This is an endemic to the human condition. It's all around us. One philosopher calls this the age of awkwardness. I mean, all I need to do is mention Zoom dating, right? That is such a thing. Or remember in the public sphere, very memorably, Jennifer Lawrence in 2013, when she went to pick up her, to accept her first Academy Award, fell flat on her face as she mounted the staircase. Awkward. Now, in this age of fear and flux and tensions, awkwardness seems like the last thing we need. Kind of a wrench in the system, of our living. And as funny as it can be, we don't really welcome awkwardness. 65% of Americans actually say they hate or strongly dislike being present for awkward moments. And yet, there is an explosion of new research into this concept, this idea, that might overturn our negative ideas about awkwardness. For instance, scientists from many different disciplines are finding out that it's an opportunity for social repair. Awkwardness also gives us the chance to co-create new norms and conventions, and it is linked to human well-being. Part of the surge in science, this is part of a surge in scientific research on the upsides of so-called aversive states of mind, for instance, uncertainty or confusion. These are states that are seen as negative and now are being discovered to be highly positive for human growth, learning, and well-being. So I'll dig in to awkwardness, and first we'll talk about a little bit about what is it? How do we define awkwardness? It's so murky, messy, hard to nail down. And when is awkwardness a good thing or not? And why are we so repulsed and uneasy in and around awkwardness and yet fascinated? Google searches for the terms awkward moments have actually risen 200% in the last 5 years. So awkwardness, what is it? Well, the word itself is fascinating. The etymology comes from Middle English, awkward. Awk means wrong, and word means to face or to turn. So it literally means to face the wrong way. So originally, this idea, this concept came from our human relationship to our surroundings, which of course was so important for human survival. Over the centuries, now the predominant definition or meaning of awkwardness is social. So in a nutshell, awkwardness means a social rupture. It's literally like a transgression, a disruption in the social fabric of life. And I love what one participant in a psychology experiment said about awkwardness. He called it, quote, a schism in the flow of things, which I think is a wonderful term. And I'll just note briefly that awkwardness is distinct from embarrassment, closely related but distinct. Embarrassment basically involves a gaffe, a mistake. And then awkwardness is also distinct from shame. Shame is an inner state related to guilt. Awkwardness is different, a little more ambiguous, as we'll see. So, and why does it matter? When I say to people I'm writing a little bit about starting some new research about awkwardness, literally the reactions are amazing. People smile, they step back, they visceral, they laugh nervously. It really punches us in the gut. And why is that? Well, in a word, belonging. Social relations are as key to human survival as food, shelter, and sleep. And this is true, not just in ancient times when to be exiled, of course, meant death. It's true today when loneliness is equated now with smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And social relations now is being discovered to be highly important for our physical and our mental well-being. Just 2 minutes of being ostracized is actually instigates or activates parts of the brain related to physical pain. So we literally feel it hurts when we're ostracized, when we're socially isolated. And second, awkward moments deeply reflect the complexity of social relations. This is why awkwardness is so prevalent, of course, because our ability or to just be social together is so complex. As the pioneering sociologist Irving Goffman once wrote, just walking down the street, humans have to signal that they are trustworthy, rational, non-threatening. He called this living up to the interaction order. And conversations, of course, are extraordinarily complex. We have to do something called turn taking and sort of take turns listening and speaking. We have to carry in mind something called intersubjectivity, which is that amorphous state of knowing whether we're on and off the same page. We have to trade information. All of that happens in a mere conversation. So awkwardness reflects the importance of and complexity of our social relationships and the importance of belonging. Now, what are some of the roots to awkwardness? What instigates it? I talked about it as a social rupture. Well, basically, you can look for the roots of awkwardness in 2 types of social ruptures. First, broken norms or conventions, and second, absent norms. So broken norms are called transgressions by psychologists. Just think about, still, even today, wearing flip-flops to a funeral. That's awkward. That's a broken norm. Or hypothetically, think about a time when you're working at home and you took a little nap and your boss calls and he or she can detect that sleepiness in your voice. That's when your private life clashes with your public life. That's awkward. That's a transgression. And silence is one of the types of awkwardness most stated by people. Silence, of course, too much silence, I mean, makes people feel disconnected. And this is also important because just as many forms of awkwardness are culturally different or varied, so too is silence. So that's very important. Awkwardness around the world takes many different forms. Business meetings in Japan often, on average, have silences of 8.2 seconds. How many people think that seems like a long time? Americans think that it's getting awkward when you have a silence of 4 seconds, and I will not test you on it. It'll seem like an eternity. That's at the outer edge of what we consider conventional. And secondly, absent norms. Well, all I have to do is say COVID, right? Masking, learning to Zoom, distancing each other. Conventions are dynamic, as is language, as in norms, and in COVID early days especially, these seem to be thrown out the window. Tweets about awkwardness were highest at the start of COVID, naturally. I remember one section of my book on uncertainty is actually an anecdote of my story of a man opening the door for me, but yet we were supposed to be distancing, and I wrote about it as a moment of uncertainty, but it's also a moment of awkwardness. A second example of absent norms, or seemingly absent norms, depending on individuals, is gender pronouns now. This expands our use of the language in order to either hide or indicate difference in identity. They, as a singular, was Merriam-Webster's word of the year in 2019. And yet, it's very interesting because sometimes awkwardness, again, is in the eye of the beholder. Because they, as singular, has been in use in the margins of the English language since 1375. You can even find it in Jane Austen. And by that I mean, as you know, my brother is an artist. They, paint with oils. We all know that now. And I must say, historical footnote, shout out to New Bedford, 226 years ago, on this very day, March 3rd, was the first brouhaha about gender pronouns in the United States, according to a very famous linguist. On this day, a group of women wrote into a now defunct marine newspaper called the Medal, and they wrote an essay about gossip, and in order not to reveal the gender of the person they were talking about, these women used they singular. Well, in the next issue of the Medal, a man named Alonso chastised these women and said they were not only ungrammatical, but how dare they, etc., etc. Well, and then they wrote back and said, we were trying to mask the gender for deliberate purposes. And this famous linguist that I traded emails with said, yes, that's the first time in America we had a controversy about gender pronouns. So, happened right here. So, what happens when we have awkwardness? We've seen the roots of these absent or broken norms, but what happens when there's the wrench, the schism in the flow of things? Well, first, unease, right? Everyone can empathize with that. Studies show that people, no surprise, when there's something awkward, they fidget, they blush, their attention sharpens, time slows, and things amplify. Now, this is very interesting. Well, Kirby, the fellow in the psychological study who called it the schism in the flow of things, actually was telling researchers an anecdote about his time meeting the parents. He was young, his girlfriend was young, and for some reason he decided to lie about his age and say he was much older. It created this terrible, awkward moment. And as Kirby said, the mom's eyes were wide as saucers. And you see that heightened attention right there. But it's really interesting because in my book on uncertainty, I found that unease, especially regarding uncertainty, which awkwardness is actually a form of good stress. So scientists are beginning to distinguish between stress systems and when we're uneasy, and when we're facing something new or ambiguous or unexpected and we're uneasy, that is the kind of stress that helps us rise to the occasion of confronting the unknown. So when you're unsure, your attention sharpens, your working memory goes up, your brain becomes more receptive to new data. All of this occurs in awkward situations to various degrees. So that's one of the first gifts of awkwardness. Now, second, what happens after something awkward happens? We feel uneasy. Well, typically people take one of two paths. They avoid or they directly respond to the situation. In one survey, 22% of people said they actually exit the scene as quickly as they could. 10% freeze by self-report and just do nothing. But this is actually a mistake. Study after study is beginning to show that, as one psychologist wrote, ignoring awkwardness is socially perilous. Now, why is this? Well, first of all, it actually preserves the awkwardness. The awkwardness is carried forward. So in other words, if we just ignore or flee the scene, it entrenches those tensions. And I don't know if you have relatable experiences. But one professor of, I think, psychology wrote in a book about her awkward situation in a kind of a serious way. She had tenure, so she was not powerless in her institution, but she was the recipient of many inappropriate remarks from a colleague, and so she just ignored him, avoided him, tried to make the situation go away. Now, that's very natural, but at the same time, avoidance of the awkwardness caused two missed opportunities. One, to call out that sexual harassment, and two, to perhaps repair the relationship with the colleague and move forward. The second type of response is directly addressing awkwardness. That can be through honest conversation, then or later, or telling a joke. And the good news is 50% of Americans in that same survey said they do this. I was once at one of my favorite libraries in New York City, kind of hanging out, chatting with a librarian while I was taking a break from research. And this is a sister library to the Providence Athenaeum. And we were talking about quiet places, that we like to go, and sometimes it's hard. And I was saying that the Providence Athenaeum was overrun by Brown University students during exam time, so it wasn't quiet then, just kvetching. But I said, Brown students take over during exams. And she looked at me, and it was terribly awkward, and I realized she thought I was making a racial remark. It wouldn't have happened in Rhode Island, but I immediately talked to her and explained, and so we were able to come to an agreement. Sociologists say in their studies that, people in studies say that directly addressing awkwardness is uncomfortable, but they prefer it. And people actually say that directly responding to awkwardness is a moral choice. Why is this? Well, here in that sexual harassment anecdote, or my story at the Brown students, here's an opportunity for social repair, and for updating social norms. In fact, awkwardness is becoming a topic of great interest to disability advocates. 2/3 of British people in one study said they feel awkward around people with disabilities, and younger people tend to avoid talking with people with disabilities because of this awkwardness. They actually, this advocacy group in the UK started a campaign called End the Awkward. And this has been tried in Canada. One Norwegian disability researcher said that the awkward moment signals a need for change. It signals the opportunity to turn avoidance into a conclusion. And Irving Goffman, the sociologist who I mentioned before, talks about people at the margins of society having a precarious and provisional role in our social relationships. Precarious, provisional, and yet awkwardness, when directly addressed, it has a unifying effect. We can reframe the situation to accommodate a new norm or just to make it funny or lighter. As one philosopher said, quote, "Any social order that makes room for awkwardness is making room for human beings." I love that. And tiny other little hint of the good course that directness takes in studies, people who report that they are tolerant of awkwardness and awkward situations also are twice as good at picking up on social cues. So directly addressing awkwardness can repair tensions, update norms, boost inclusion. And there's another way in which I think awkwardness really matters today. I see awkwardness as an act of resistance. Today, we live in a society built on the values, convenience, speed, efficiency. This has been true for hundreds of years, but now tech companies design the apps and the software and everything we're inhabiting to be friction-free. Seamlessness is the priority. That's to make us buy more. Amazon worked very hard to make shopping one-clickable. And now, sycophantic AI, and AI is 50% more sycophantic than humans, pander to us, making us feel as though we want to defer to it. We're trapped in a cycle of deference that actually has been shown in early studies to lower critical thinking, lower creativity. So the seamlessness of life offers us the fallacy that life can be smooth and not rough. Young people often, not always, fear cringe. It's awkward, it's effortful. Sometimes they use AI to answer the professor in class and break up by text. Older generations stick to the happy place in conversation. 60% of Americans say they don't talk about politics because it might be uncomfortable. If we can't be uncomfortable now, I don't know how we're going to survive. And I'll just mention cringe comedy because it's so popular. It's, I think, the predominant form of comedy now in the United States. And does everybody know what cringe comedy is? Basically a form of comedy. There's a show called The Office. There are many shows I can't name, but it's all about laughing at awkward moments. But there's a really important distinction. As important as it is to laugh and to have comedy and awkwardness, I think it's a very important, I think cringe comedy is a symptom of our yearning for seamlessness, because instead of being involved in awkward situations, we're laughing at it from a distance. And so I don't see cringe comedy as the path to success in awkwardness. Awkwardness is friction. It's what we need to grow, repair, and attune. And so just in closing, I'll also mention a few studies that quite heartily talk about our fears of awkwardness are overblown. It's uncomfortable, it's funny, it's repulsive, it's complicated, it's a disruption. And yet, Study after study shows that, for instance, people overestimate how harshly we will be judged for mishaps or vulnerability. Other studies show that conversations with strangers are less awkward than they fear. And in the UK, just recently, there was an intervention related to talking with strangers, one of those very awkward moments. 280 people signed on to talk to one stranger a day for an entire week. The scientists found that it was, lo and behold, less awkward than everybody expected, and they gained confidence in talking to their fellow humans. 41% of the people in this study actually exchanged emails with a stranger. That's powerful. We can work through the awkwardness. So when awkwardness surfaces, when we're turned the wrong way, let's listen to what it's telling us. Let's co-create a moment of inclusion, especially for people in precarious circumstances in society. Let's not withdraw. Let's resist the idea that life can be friction-free. Thank you. Yes, we have to start questions. Or, yes, okay, we'll start questions. There was awkward 1 second silence. Oh, you have a question. So the question is, this feels very modern. Did people in the Stone Age feel awkward when one guy stepped in a puddle and splashed the other as they were exiting the cave? That's such a great question. I did just read a book called Laughter and Awkwardness in the Early Middle Ages. So that sets us back. But I would guess that perhaps as social relations became more complicated, awkwardness became more endemic to our social relations. Ages of etiquette. If you think of times in the Renaissance, there's a term called sprezzatura. That is an Italian term for trying to make things smooth and easy. So, hearkening to technology today, etiquette was supposed to make, the courtiers or poetry or love flow seamlessly, and that was the value. Well, of course, we all want fluency. Humans want the easy way, and it is an achievement to make, for a figure skater to make it look easy, but at the same time, the complexity of social relations, I think, in modern society probably made awkwardness far more, at least, put it on our radar screen. Yes, wow, okay, thank you. Okay, so there was a BAFTA, the Academy Awards of UK, a man who was the subject of a documentary, a man who has Tourette's, in which he cannot help but shout curses, and he happened to attend the ceremony, and he, in the back, shouted a terrible curse when two British, African, black presenters were, I think, the stars of Sinners, perhaps, I don't know. But, so it was a terrible moment. It shows the dark side of awkwardness. There's been a lot of debate about, what should have happened, because the BBC and BAFTA did nothing. And I would agree that here is, I hadn't thought of that example, but here is a time when addressing something honestly is important, because as I've been discussing, in relation to awkwardness, pushing people to make the exclusivity of awkwardness or the exclusion of awkwardness can make people hurt and suffer. So I think that is an occasion when, you don't know what to say. The BBC people were as shocked, hopefully, as anyone, but at the same time, sometimes it's better, I think, yes, to address an awkward situation. So it's a good example. So maybe someone over here, yes? Well, I think it sort of segues into, perhaps education in and around uncertainty. That life isn't always scripted, that Therefore, there is room for multiple options and things to go wrong, that errors in your homework aren't a disaster, that you can be, a different person tomorrow, and we all need to be tolerant of that, because that's where flexibility comes from. And I think maybe grounding talk about awkwardness in, talk about the power of maybe might help.
Great, thank you.
Yes, maybe in the back? Yes. I'm glad you asked, because I was going to fit this in. I wanted to write about, well, I've been steeped in uncertainty for years, and it's such a fascinating topic, and awkwardness is kind of a little, baby sister to uncertainty. It's a part of uncertainty. But I had to go to Australia to give this talk at the South by Southwest they do in Australia. And they were very adamant, because, often at talks, they pass around a microphone, or you line up and there's a microphone, and you show yourself. But sometimes there's something called Mentimeter, which is a software, and the speaker holds up a QR code on the screen, and then the people in the audience can download the QR code and then give their questions. And of course, then the speaker is looking at this laptop with 500 questions coming in, and literally like this. But anyhow, put that aside. This was mandatory software. I like it when people stand up and show themselves, and we see them, and it's a human moment. But I had to learn Mentimeter, so I got on the beginner's tutorial, and there's a young person who's teaching me how to do this software, and 3 times in probably 5 minutes she said, "So you don't want to talk about a meeting? This is going to get rid of that awkwardness. Oh, you don't want to raise your hand in X situation? This is going to get rid of that awkwardness." And by the end of this tutorial, I thought, why do we want to get rid of awkwardness? I was really fuming. So that's why I got into it. And it's so much more interesting than I thought. As far as, tips on awkwardness, I haven't quite got there because this is new research, but I would have to say that it has everything to do with uncertainty. And in psychology, there are now, one of the most successful ways to treat anxiety, literally treat anxiety, is to teach people to be tolerant of uncertainty. What does that mean? People who are tolerant of uncertainty see it as a challenge, not a threat. People who are tolerant in uncertainty in COVID, in the worst days of COVID, were more accepting of the realities of the situation. People who were intolerant of uncertainty, denied, avoided, and turned to substances. So you can see the difference. The rigidity is intolerant of uncertainty, then you're having trouble with life. But in these interventions to successfully treat anxiety, scientists are just helping people bite off a little more of the unknown. They basically ask them to try going on a blind date. And it's kind of like exposure therapy, but for uncertainty. They actually answer their phone without caller ID. Something that makes younger generations, like my daughter, go, "Oh my God, Mom, you're kidding." And then people are asked to delegate more work. So that's a really cool thing, incrementally trying something unknown each day. I think that might work, spill over into awkwardness. I think that might help just make you realize that that's part of life. It's not the end. It's not the time to exit. So, and maybe come over afterwards and ask me the third question. And she asked, first of all, is awkwardness a more external or internal state? Great question. And then secondly, her mom says, if people are going to laugh at you, give them the reason to laugh with you. So turn the situation. So how does humor perhaps factor into that? That's such a great question. Well, first of all, I think it's really interesting because I kind of think that awkwardness is both internal and external. Because of that shared social state. People at work talk about, oh my gosh, there's a term for getting on the same page at work, the same model, shared mental model. Yes, that's a big business term. But we really do, the intersubjectivity in a conversation, we really do have an ability to be on the same page mentally. And that's true, and we have the ability to, or, according to mirror neurons, which we can't, overvalue, but it's a part of how we reflect one another in terms of facial expressions, etc. So this awkward moment, I think, is so fascinating because we really are on the same page that it is awkward, maybe not to all degrees, etc. But at the same time, we are sharing, again, to different degrees or in a variety of ways, an internal state too. So the person is very fascinating because in studies, the person who did the awkward thing feels, as though the spotlight's on them, etc. But then the people who are watching it some scientists call it contagious. They feel, partly through empathy, the pain, they feel awkward too. So it's very, very fascinating. As far as your mom's advice, I think it's good advice, depending on the moment. I mean, if someone is going to be hurt, or if you're in a really situation, you have to read the situation and understand where humor might come in. But humor does reframe, and humor is, as comedians all say, basically a kind of vulnerability on parade. And so by reframing something as humorous, if appropriate, I think that creates a shared social state, which is, and maybe lightens the mood. So I think that's good. And then those were Jennifer Lawrence's first remarks. She said, "You're just standing up, giving me a standing ovation because you're, instead of laughing at me or something like that." I don't know. She tried to make a joke. So, okay. And any other questions? Way back. Okay. Did I have any other interesting findings on different cultures approaching awkwardness? Not yet. I really just am beginning this research, and so I haven't really found too many scintillating details about what constitutes awkwardness in other cultures. I think that there's a lot of possibilities. I mean, how people greet each other, what's the etiquette in and around, birth, death, and marriage, and etc. So it really probably takes many, many different forms, but I don't quite know any. I focus a little bit on silence because that's so true of all cultures. Really interesting. Yeah. Well, first, interspecies ability to pick up on awkwardness, and I think you probably mean dogs or cats, maybe pigs, or animals that humans are around. And I don't know if I don't know because I haven't looked into that research. I would guess that animals can sense a broken norm. I mean, if you walk your dog every single day at 7 a.m. and during the storm you just said nada, that dog will pick up on that norm, whether a norm is related to instinct and ritual and behavior and etc. So I think that might be part of what leads people to say that an animal can pick up on awkwardness. The second question is, I guess in a time of great political fractures and tensions and polarization, we are very much in a time of contested norms, I'd say. And so even the language we use can be seen as negative or positive depending on, quote unquote, what side you're on. The good thing about awkwardness is that it is so quotidien, it's so banal, it's so incremental, it's so everywhere. So rather than taking on the big issues, maybe we can be less fearful of talking to a stranger because it's awkward. Maybe we can discuss the awkwardness and build foundations for discussing something more. I just think that it's really interesting because I've been reading about trust. Social trust is pretty low, not just in institutions. I knew that, but I came across new research from the Pew Research Center that talks about social, let's see if I can remember the exact statistic, but I think it's only a third of Americans trust most people, and that's down from 50% just a decade ago. I mean, we literally don't trust most people, and that's shocking. When you trust people generally, you're more willing to help a neighbor and expect that they'll help you. You're more willing to take a meal to a sick friend. So the lubrication of trust in society is really important for a healthy society. And I don't know any connections to awkwardness, but I would say that maybe by venturing forth, and then I also should say trust is a risk-taking. I read about trust in my Distracted book. Trust is a bit of a gamble because you don't know what that person is. Are they trustworthy? Or, can they trust you? Or I used to ask strangers in airports to watch my luggage for a minute. I don't do that now. And it's interesting that we laugh. But I think that trust can be built up in small ways through acts of kindness, and awkwardness can be a kind of living with the rough spots as well as a kind of kindness. I think last question, okay. This is a new topic for me, so what directions will it go? Well, I think that ostracism is really important to me because of the way we dole out micro-incivilities to one another, even when we think of them as being on our side. So I think small steps make a big difference in healing and togetherness. I also think vulnerability is very, very, very important here. Showing vulnerability, maybe that's sort of a trite topic now, but it's very important not to wall ourselves off from each other. But then I'm also really interested in that last point, which was that awkwardness is friction, we need friction, and so I'm really interested in difficulty. And not to disparage struggle, because you never want people to struggle to an X degree or to have misfortune, etc. But within the realm of life, I just keep coming back to the idea that difficulty is an investment and a form of honesty, and it's one that our contemporary society disparages and devalues and promises that we can avoid. And I think that's really interesting, where and how and what difficulty is important. So thank you. Thank you for great questions.
Thank you, Madam, for that illuminating discussion. You've given us something to really think about and perhaps even try to embrace a little bit of awkwardness in our lives. Please, once again, thank you, and join me in thanking Maggie Jackson and a token of appreciation from the folks at the Science Café.
Thank you very much.